So Mother Tongue Creative House was a creative agency that I started about a year and a half ago. So literally the agency's heart is to preserve the South African aesthetic and constantly try to innovate it and find new ways to present it to the world. So the name came from me being a black South African creative in our country and trying to find my identity within that. So in a way, I'm still paying homage to my heritage, but I'm finding new ways to present it in a very unconventional way by becoming an illustrator and a designer. What we often see is the top of the iceberg, which is what is exposed and what people know, but there's a giant scope of Africa that hasn't been unearthed, and that is what caught my attention and sparked curiosity within me. So I really perceive African creativity to be in this direction and almost finding my place within it. So this picture just shows Africa's hidden potential, and I think for creatives it is not only our job but our responsibility and pleasure to unearth the hidden parts of Africa and show the world what we have to offer. So I think to young creatives that are on the edge about going into a creative career, the only thing I can tell you is the hidden potential of Africa is all you need to plow into this unearthing of our creative identity. And a lot of people are noticing this potential, but I think it is our duty to make it lucrative and show the world from our perspective instead of having Western perspectives on what Africa is. So I also think in order to unearth this well, we do need to pay attention to forming our craft correctly. So a lot of it has to do with practicing your craft each day, but what is really helpful is also getting a tertiary degree, because a lot of these degrees that are seen as reputable often have honors and masters and doctorate, and that is something we shouldn't, I think personally, we shouldn't ignore in a creative career, because we do want to compete on that level, and to make it academically reputable as well as artistically reputable, I think a tertiary career is really necessary. Okay, so with the Heineken Next Level Bar, I was actually invited by between 10 and 5 to join the team, and when I actually got there, I saw how many creators were involved in putting together this really unique container, the amount of furniture design that had gone in there. They were really pushing creatives to go to the next level as well. So that's what attracted me towards the campaign. And getting there, I was super inspired by how well everything just worked and how well designed the things were. So it was a little bit of pressure to kind of do my job well as well. But I thought, let me just push myself and do something completely out of my element, working on a giant canvas. So this is the biggest I've ever worked on, and kind of working with patterns and abstracting different forms. So yeah, the Heineken experience was absolutely amazing because it inspired me to go to the next level, and this would be something I would pursue in the future. So on the night, I was actually invited to create a selfie backdrop / mural for the Heineken Next Level Bar. So what I did was kind of challenge myself in the sense that I always do digital illustrations in Illustrator and use vectors, but this time I decided to use ink and Copic markers. So I was really challenged by Heineken's theme Next Level, and this was kind of my way of pushing my illustration to the next level. I was actually invited by between 10 and 5 to getting there. I was super inspired by how well everything just worked and how well designed the things were. So it was a little bit of pressure to kind of do my job. I learned how kind of rewarding it is to experiment and push yourself to the next level, because this is something I wouldn't have ordinarily done, but I figured out how much I actually enjoy patterns, I enjoy things that are abstract, I enjoy working with my hands and ink and Copic markers. So I found that going to this country, the nature that is present is so beautiful and almost resonates the colors that South Africans wear, but this is present in the kind of plants that are there, their attention to nature. So coming back, I started incorporating a lot of nature into my illustrations. I incorporated incorporated almost a preservation not only for the South African aesthetic but for the nature that South Africa has as well, and almost producing it in not the mundane big five with the oil paint gradient, but looking at maybe representing the big five in a new way. So this was an editorial illustration that I did shortly after returning from Brazil, and being inspired to almost portray nature in a different way, not be afraid of unconventional colors for nature as well. So this was showing the South African animals that we have, just with red and green and blue, but it still has the essence of it coming from South Africa. So often when I approach really new projects, I look at my identity and the identity that I would love to portray. And as a South African, I have noticed that my identity doesn't solely rely on being 100% African, neither does it solely rely on being 100% Western, but rather a combination of the two. And in my illustrations, I always try and make reference to the African heritage, but also kind of highlight the greatness of Western technology and put the two together to make this really unique identity that I think South Africa has. So that's where Afropolitan is of an African heritage, but having a global perspective and almost creating a hybrid of the two. So I think this really interesting identity grabs global attention a lot in recent years. And I think that's solely because Africa has an interesting way of communicating to a very large audience. So we communicate really well with the people on our continent, but because we have that blended identity, we are able to communicate to others on a global scale as well. And the attention that this is grabbing, I think, is allowing South Africans to almost reposition and it's making ourselves globally. A voice of maybe victimhood, poverty, corruption and disease to something a little bit more positive. So we're finding that globally our voice is maybe resonating something of becoming the new source of inspiration in the world, and maybe it's not people looking at the West for inspiration but rather looking towards Africa for inspiration. Another dream that I hope to do is possibly work with Google and develop illustrations on that, because it hasn't been kind of documented how Google has been paying attention to South African creators. So I'd love to almost kickstart the ball on that. Afropolitan, quirky, colorful, unafraid, and patriotic. And I use Afropolitan because that makes reference to someone of an African descent, but with a global perspective on how they manage their creativity. And colorful because I use every kind of color I find in Illustrator. I would say quirky because I like to put two things together that wouldn't often look good together. And I really like showing portraits in colors that you don't often see. So I draw green people, purple people, but not necessarily attach a race, but rather a feeling. I would say unafraid because I draw purple and blue people, and I like to almost provoke thought in people. Patriotic because there's always an element of home in my work. You will always see something that looks familiar and African and makes reference to my South African heritage. Laduma from Maxxosa. I would love to almost develop patterns for his knitwear alongside him and see what kind of garments we can come up with together. Second would have to be Guus Groenewald. I would love to have a giant exhibition with him and I making illustrations together, working on each other's projects and seeing how the two styles could produce something extremely new and something that's still iconically South African. The third person I'd like to collaborate with is Fatwane from I See a Different You. His photography is amazing and still has a South African essence that I really love. So if we had to put that type of photography and my type of illustration together, I think a really cool project would come from that. Fourth would have to be Maya Angelou, even though she passed on recently, I would love to take her poems and almost put visuals towards it, but almost put my visuals to life and use motion design and kind of use that to enhance the beautiful words that she puts together. And lastly, I would love to collaborate with the musician Troy Sivan. So he's South African born, but is now doing really, really amazing work globally. And I would love to work on album art for him and almost put his live performances together and work on productions behind the screen and see how his music and my illustration can come together really well.
What I dream of achieving through Mother Tongue Creative House is to build an agency that's the best agency for our country instead of the best agency in our country. So this is an agency that would pay attention to raising up young creatives in South Africa and almost produce work that still resonates with home, that is still relatable to home, but views everything on a global context as well to still stay relevant to global markets too.
Okay, so I think 5 words to describe my work would have to be Afropolitan. Wait. And the 5th one's 2 words.